Hi, everyone. We are so happy to have you here with us on the Stronger Marriage webinar produced by Utah Marriage Commission, hosted by Utah State University. I am Abby Petrie, and we're excited to have you all join us today. In today's webinar, we are so excited to be joined by Nevin Alderman. Nevin is the owner and director of Renew Relationship Counseling, a dynamic and engaging clinical practice that specializes in marriage counseling. Nevin is a licensed clinical mental health counselor and has been practicing professionally in the field of mental health since 2007. Nevin has a passion for the field of mental health and a strong belief in the capacity of couples, families, and individuals to grow and overcome life's obstacles. Nevin has been honored to hold numerous positions in clinical administration, including serving as the executive clinical director at a renowned treatment center for families. In addition to traditional clinical and administrative work, Nevin has been facilitating professional workshops and multi-systemic groups and seminars since 2008. Nevin has been recognized as an expert presenter both regionally and nationally, and has been invited to instruct professional audiences across the country. He is the founder of the Renew System for Couples, a cutting-edge, dynamic, and holistic approach to relational healing. In this webinar, you will learn the vital role of active enrichment. You will learn to identify the phase of fulfillment your relationship is in and how to keep fulfillment active in your relationship. You will also learn about the concept of reciprocal fulfillment, what it looks like, and how to create it. Finally, you will learn about the relational bank account and how you can avoid bankruptcy in your relationship. Learn how to love stronger, connect deeper, and live happier in your relationship. If you have any questions, please ask them by entering your questions through the Q&A function. The chat is going to be turned off during this webinar, so this is the best place to ask your questions. We'll have a 15-minute Q&A at the end of his presentation, so write down your questions and save them for the end. If you've joined us for the CEU credit, make sure to stay on until the end of the presentation. The survey needed for your credit will automatically load it onto the screen, and then you will receive an email from the Utah Marriage Commission with your certificate. You may also email the Utah Marriage Commission to receive your survey on this webinar, and once the survey is completed, you will get an email with your CEU credit certification. And we will now turn the time over to Nevin for his presentation.
Hey, I'm so grateful for the opportunity to present, and I love doing presentations like this. I'm grateful for that introduction. Thank you, Abigail. And I day to day, my greatest passion and joy is serving couples, and I've been doing that for about 15 years now as a licensed clinician, and love the work. Second to that passion is doing presentations like this. My favorite style is with a live audience where there's some interaction, but I appreciate you inviting me today to do a lecture as well, and hope to make that content interesting and engaging for you. This topic, increasing fulfillment in marriage, is dear to my heart. My relationship with my wife is my favorite relationship, and has brought my life so much joy, and it brings me great joy in working with couples in all aspects of life and relationship, and seeing what kind of healing we can create and what type of fulfillment they can obtain in their life. And that's what I want to talk about a little bit today. The presentation that I'm going to share with you today is connected to the acronym Renew. Renew is not only the name of the practice that I own and operate, but it's also an acronym for some vital principles for couples that, when applied, help simplify complex problems that they face and help them work through those dynamics in a way that's meaningful. And so today, as we talk about enrichment, that's the first E in Renew. So the first E in Renew is this topic of enrichment and how to enrich a relationship. And we're going to focus on enrichment today in this presentation as we talk a little bit about what couples can do to help strengthen their relationship. So let's dive into that concept of enrich and enriching a relationship. And the first thing that I want to do is introduce to you a fulfillment model. Now, this fulfillment model will present itself as an opportunity for you to kind of self-assess and self-diagnose where your relationship is. And I want to begin there as we talk about how to fulfill a relationship, how to increase that fulfillment, how to maintain what's called reciprocal fulfillment, what that is, and how you can maintain that in your relationship. And then finally, the relational bank account and keeping a good, healthy balance in that relational bank account. So let's start with that increasing fulfillment part and the fulfillment model. So this fulfillment model is presented as an upside down triangle. And the reason that we've designed it this way is to represent higher levels of fulfillment leading to lower levels of fulfillment. So up in those top categories, that's where the most fulfillment exists in the relationship. And then, of course, as it tapers down to the point, that's depicting the least amount of influence and fulfillment, all the way down to zero fulfillment. So let's start at the top and let's talk about what these concepts mean. So active phase fulfillment. Active phase fulfillment is the highest level of fulfillment that a couple can experience in their relationship. And it's experienced when they're actively engaged in reciprocal fulfillment practices. So I'm going to talk more about reciprocal fulfillment in a minute, but you can think about this as when a couple is engaged in what's fulfilling for each other, that's active phase fulfillment. So for example, if one of my most meaningful ways to feel love is through physical touch, then if my wife gives me a shoulder rub, right, or if she's holding my hand, I'm experiencing active phase fulfillment. The same as if one of my primary languages of love was through receiving a gift, a meaningful gift. I'm going to experience active phase fulfillment when she's considerate in providing a gift that's meaningful to me. Her presenting it, me receiving it is going to be one of the most fulfilling aspects of our relationship. And when a couple is doing a good job spending adequate time in active phase fulfillment, they typically describe their relationship as blissful. So that's a common descriptor that a couple will talk about when they're in that active phase fulfillment. Now, there is such thing as an even higher level of fulfillment, but the reason that it's not on this fulfillment model is because it's not very sustainable. You might call that one hyperactive fulfillment. And hyperactive fulfillment often exists for a short period of time when a couple is first coming together and they're in that kind of Twitter-pated, new honeymoonish type relationship with one another. It's almost as if the whole world around them goes away for a minute. And that can be frustrating if you're another meaningful person in their life, to feel like that you don't exist anymore in their world. But that we could call that hyperactive, and that's when the couple is completely caught up in fulfillment practices with each other. It's just not sustainable long term, and the rest of life has to go on. And so that's why it didn't make it onto our model. So we have active phase fulfillment. Passive phase fulfillment is when a couple is between moments of actively investing in their relationship. So it's a moderate fulfillment place, a little bit less fulfilling than active phase fulfillment. But this is when the couple is passively appreciating each other and they're passively appreciating the relationship. There's low engagement in fulfillment practices in this level of fulfillment, in this phase of fulfillment. But in general, it's quite enjoyable. And this is the passive times between active investments. And the reason that there has to be room for passive phase fulfillment is because a couple cannot, or it's not wise, not sustainable for them to only be caught up in giving and receiving love with one another as they go through life. There's other things that need their time and attention. So for example, there's things like work that's needed for a couple to invest in. I think I've got, let's see, close this window. Window popped up, not sure what that was. So work might pull on their time and attention. Children can pull on their time and attention. Civic responsibilities. They might be invested in service activities, right? There's other relationships in their world that need time and attention. Schooling needs time and attention. So there's a lot of things that goes on in a couple's world that distracts from their relationship. And passive phase fulfillment is when a couple does a good job keeping each other in mind, appreciating each other, and considering each other as they go throughout their day. So for example, if my wife's at work and she's thoughtful about me and she decides to send words of encouragement to me, hey, I heard you're doing a presentation tonight. Hope it goes really well, right? It's that passive phase fulfillment, that considering, that thoughtfulness that led to her making an active investment, right? So this is the between times that if we're thoughtful of each other, they lead to moments of active investment. And that's the reason that we have this mustachy line that goes through here, bouncing back and forth between passive and active, because healthy couples who are doing a great job at maintaining high levels of fulfillment and connection in their relationship bounce back and forth between passive and active fulfillment in a sustainable and consistent way. So as they wake up and they go through their day, they passively consider and appreciate and are grateful for and think about, make room in their mind for one another. And that passive consideration leads to active investments. So that's why we have that mustachy line. And the goal is that we're all working to maintain in that passive to active place in the relationship. Now, because life gets really busy and there's all kinds of phases of a couple's relationship that they have to pass through that changes the dynamics in their relationship, complacency can often happen in a relationship. And complacent phase fulfillment is lower fulfillment. It's quite low fulfillment. There isn't a lot of appreciation happening when a couple is complacent, and there's minimal investment in fulfilling practices. So the active phase is starting to be disengaged more and more. There's still usually good intentions in the relationship. The couple typically cares about one another. They think about each other often. They're considerate of each other. But there's longer absences between active investments. So they're kind of bouncing between this considering one another and being neglectful of each other, and considering one another and being neglectful of each other. Longer absences of fulfillment, active investments happening. So this can happen, for example, a couple gets married, they go, and have a little honeymoon experience. They come back to real life. And as they come back to real life, there's a career waiting for them. And let's say that there's some full-time schooling waiting for them as well, right? So the career and the schooling easily presents the couple with a lot of distractions, needful distractions, meaningful distractions, but distractions nonetheless that make it a little bit more difficult to keep each other in mind, right? So that passive phase fulfillment suffers just a little because there's a lot of distractions pulling at their time and attention. And if they're not mindful, if they're not creative, if they're not adaptable, they'll also find that the opportunities to actively invest in connective experiences with each other also suffers, right? And so if they don't adjust in a phase like that, they'll experience this relational complacency. And it happens in all kinds of phases. Work can create something like that. Schooling can create something like that. The introduction of children to the relationship can introduce something like that. Retirement, health concerns, all kinds of complex dynamics in a couple's life as they phase through life can create the opportunities for complacency. Most couples don't plan to be complacent. It's just that life happens. And as life happens, they have a difficult time adapting to how to stay connected. So complacency usually happens with good intentions, but they start to go undelivered. This is also where criticism and defensiveness can start to become commonplace in a couple's relationship. Now that's meaningful for us to understand, because it's a way that you can assess if your relationship's starting to become complacent. Is criticism and defensiveness starting to become commonplace in our communication style? In other words, does it seem like my spouse is becoming more critical with me, or I tend to be more critical with them? And are we being more defensive with each other than we have in the past? So criticism is different than giving each other feedback. Feedback is important in a relationship, but criticism happens when an individual is attacking the other person's character. So instead of saying, I'm really concerned about our budget, can we sit down tonight and talk about our budget? That would be feedback. That would be the invitation of resolving an issue in the relationship. That instead might sound, if it's delivered with criticism, it might sound like, my gosh, you are the most irresponsible person with money. We need to talk, right? So sounds a little bit different than just healthy feedback. That's criticism. It's attacking a person's character. It's criticizing the way that they're doing things in the relationship. And defensiveness is different than active listening, in that defensiveness is more worried about defending myself in the relationship than it is about listening for understanding, right? So if a spouse said that, can we talk? You are ruining our budget, right? Like, you are so irresponsible with money. A defensive response might be like, are you kidding me? I'm the one that's irresponsible with our money. Have you seen how much money you've spent on fast food in the last week? Right? So it's becoming defensive. It's not really trying to listen to understand the concerns of the partner. Instead, it's blocking that feedback, that critical feedback, and then it's coming up with its own critical, harsh message to send back. So that'll start to become commonplace in a couple's relationship. And it's a way that you can tell if you're spending too much time in complacency. Criticism and defensiveness become commonplace. The relationship's also often described as mundane. If you sit down and talk with a couple and you're like, hey, how's your relationship going? Their response is probably going to sound something like, meh, it's all right. It's going okay. I love them. They love me. I don't know. It's tough sometimes. That's about how they're going to talk about the relationship. So it's not all terrible. They're not ready to throw it away or get rid of it. But it's much more mundane than it has been in the past. The other thing that I'll note here before we go further is Dr. John Gottman and Julie Gottman, world-renowned couples researchers, relational researchers. So they're probably the foremost in the world for marital research. And they present a concept called the Four Horsemen. And the Four Horsemen is just helping us understand 4 key things that they found in their research that are the most predictive of a relationship not making it and potentially ending in divorce. And 2 of those 4 horsemen are criticism and defensiveness, right? So 2 of the most harsh things on relational wellness, criticism and defensiveness. And so it's really important for us to start to identify, and if that's becoming commonplace in our relationship, it may be headed in not good places. The reason I want you to know about criticism and defensiveness as it relates to complacency is because if you notice that it's becoming more critical and defensive, the solution is increased active investments. Let's practice considering each other more and looking for opportunities to actively invest in each other, which we'll talk about more here in just a minute. Let me move on to the next phase of fulfillment. That one is drought. And drought is exactly what it sounds like. Drought is long absences of fulfillment in the relationship, right? So we've gotten so complacent, so comfortably complacent in the relationship. Complacent has become so common that we are experiencing longer and longer and longer droughts of connective love, active love, acts of love in the relationship, right? So active phase fulfillment is hardly happening ever at all. Maybe once in a while when we make it on a date once a month or an anniversary trip or a birthday, right? Maybe that there's some strong focus on considering each other in that passive phase fulfillment and then actively investing in each other in that active phase fulfillment. But between moments like that in the relationship, love's just not being exchanged. So longer and longer absences. Contempt is really commonplace. So this is number 3 of the 4 horsemen that we talked about a minute ago. Dr. John and Julie Gottman talk about contempt being one of the most destructive dynamics that can start to occur in a relationship. And contempt is when you see your partner as the adversary. So you no longer see problems as adversarial, you see your partner as the problem. They are the adversarial thing in a relationship, right? So instead of it being, I think we have a financial issue, it's we have a Barbara issue, if Barbara was my wife, right? Or she might say, instead of, us having a parenting issue, we have a Nevin issue, right? So we start to see each other as the problem instead of the problem as the problem. And when we see each other as the problem, then you are my adversary. You are the problem for me in the relationship. And I need to criticize you and be defensive with you until you change, which is obviously not the solution, but that's so easy for us to fall into. So that's what contempt is. It's when in my mind and my heart, I start to see my partner as adversarial to my happiness. They are the issues in our relationship. And I'm no longer focused on working with them to resolve the issue. I see them as the issue. That's contempt. In drought, we're disengaged from fulfillment practices almost completely. There's a focus on stockpiling of resources. When you think about resources, so resources like time, resources like money, right? Like resources like opportunities to be away from the house or opportunities to engage in hobbies, right? So we start to stockpile of those in selfish ways. There's like the spend for yourself mentality that starts to happen. And a selfish approach to those types of resources. And then there can be angst with one another regarding neediness. So if my partner needs something from me, like, hey, I really need some help finishing up this project, could you come help me work on it? Right? I'll feel this angst inside that's kind of like, man, you take care of it. You don't help me. Why should I help you? Which is very different than when we're in active and passive phase fulfillment. I'm looking for opportunities because of passive phase fulfillment to actively invest in my partner's wellness, right? So I might be excited to help out in that phase, but in drought, a good way that you can tell that you're there is it just feels like anything they need from you is just one more person asking something of you. It's an indicator that you're having longer and longer absences of fulfillment in your relationship. Also, this seeking fulfillment alternatives just means over time, the more time we spend dipping into drought, complacent with each other, dipping into drought, the more time we spend there, I start to realize I cannot rely on you for fulfillment in my life. You're an unreliable source of fulfillment. And because we're all social creatures and we need a good amount of positive and happy going on in our life in order to stay out of misery and depression, we start to look for other sources for fulfillment. And that can start very benign. It doesn't have to be a terrible thing that we do. Looking for fulfillment alternatives can be as simple as investing a little bit more of my mind and my attention and my time into my career. Or it can be looking to invest a little bit more of my time and attention into my relationship with my children or into service activities. It can look like investing in hobbies a little bit more, spending more time golfing, spending more time gaming, spending a little bit more time playing a sport or a musical instrument. It can also look like developing bad habits. Like maybe I drink to numb that pain, right? Like maybe I start to abuse some prescription medications to numb that pain. Maybe I supplement with pornography for the aspects of the relationship that feels like they're absent. Maybe I start to gamble. And then, of course, as that grows, that seeking of fulfillment alternatives, it can start to become what looks like emotional affairs, right? Maybe I start to share a little bit more of my mind and my heart with another person that could feel emotionally betraying to the relationship. Maybe I start to physically connect more with others. I might start to step into physical affairs. So it doesn't typically start there. Couples typically aren't out to hurt one another. They're not out to be bad people. But certainly the longer that a drought goes on, the more vulnerable a person starts to become in the relationship for the seeking of fulfillment alternatives. And those can be very benign, or they can start to become quite severe. So that's drought phase fulfillment. And of course, if a couple doesn't rebound out of drought, if they don't realize that they're there, if they don't use contempt as a sign and indicator that, oof, I think we're in drought, the criticism and defensiveness that's going on, the seeking fulfillment alternatives, the kind of self-centered fend for yourself mentality, if they don't pick up on some of those signs, they'll start to slip into extinction. And extinction is just what happened to the dinosaurs. Extinction is that kind of flame going out in the relationship. Couples will often talk about that. Like, I feel completely disconnected from love. You know, the flame's kind of been snuffed out in the relationship. Stonewalling is the fourth of the four horsemen. And stonewalling starts to happen when a couple is spending some time in extinction. So stonewalling, the difference between stonewalling and taking a break from each other is stonewalling is an active effort to barricade yourself against your partner. So sometimes people talk about that as like a cold shoulder, getting the cold shoulder. I'll experience this with couples when they stop talking to each other for days at a time. They'll stop acknowledging each other when they're in the same room. It can be kind of annoying if you're there with them because they might send messages through you to each other. Johnny, tell your mom, right, that I'm not going to be home for dinner tonight, right? So stonewalling is when there's this effort to barricade myself from you. I'm limiting how much influence I try to have with you, how much communication I have with you, and I'm certainly barricading myself off from receiving input, feedback, or engagement from you. So that's stonewalling. Taking a break can be a really healthy thing to do when a couple's in conflict. Realizing that I'm escalating in my mind and my emotions, I'm becoming more and more angry, and I'm probably going to say and do not nice things. So I better take a break. That process of taking a break, stepping away for a minute to decrease the negativity in the relationship, that can be really helpful. That can help a couple kind of get back on course to repair a dynamic in their relationship. But stonewalling is destructive. Stonewalling typically creates more injury than it does help. And it's a sign that you're dipping into extinction. When stonewalling is happening quite often in the relationship, it can be a sign that extinction is happening. So it's an absence of fulfillment almost completely. A couple, when they're in extinction, do very little to passively consider one another or actively invest in one another. Those things are almost completely absent, if not absent. And then there's this maintaining of fulfillment alternatives that typically starts to happen here. Because of the drought in our relationship, I've investigated and started to explore fulfillment alternatives, and in extinction, a couple's almost exclusively maintaining those. They're leaning on those alternatives much more than they're looking into the relationship for fulfillment. And that can be a really problematic place for a couple to rebound from. Because they've done a good job of finding alternatives for fulfillment, there can be this difficult process in extinction where they say, man, there's no positive or happy happening for me in this relationship anymore. And when I look at what it would take, what we would have to work through in order to get to fulfillment, I'm almost completely overwhelmed. And I'm kind of doing okay without you, right? Like I have these other things in my world that bring me a certain amount of happiness or joy, and I've learned to be self-sufficient and satisfied without you. So this is where couples really start to contemplate whether or not they want to stay in the relationship any longer, or whether they just want to go ahead and pull the plug and end the relationship. So extinction is a pretty dire place for a couple to get to. Our goal is to help as many couples as possible avoid having to experience extinction. Extinction isn't impossible to come back from. It's just a lot harder when that's the phase of fulfillment that a couple's in. So it does typically take a lot of work, a lot of selflessness, a lot of personal growth, a lot of willingness to heal and forgive and work hard to get out of extinction. One more note on the creating fulfillment alternatives and maintaining those fulfillment alternatives. I don't present those to you, and in couples in general, I don't present those as like they're understandable when it comes to a place of like, well, your partner neglected you, so what are you to do? You better go find a fulfillment alternative. I'm not presenting it in that way. Certainly, there's never a good reason for a partner, for example, to become unfaithful in a marriage, right? If the marriage isn't working out well, and then the couple's first goal is to look at themselves and see what they can grow. Second, look at how they can support one another better, seek professional help, seek spiritual help, seek familial help. And if they aren't able to recover the relationship, your next responsibility is to then step away from the relationship, end the relationship formally. So I'm not presenting that in a way that says, good excuse to go cheat or something. It's just an inevitable aspect of a relationship being in a drought or extinction for a long period of time. If they fail to recover, the longer that goes, the more and more vulnerable an individual and a couple can start to become to these fulfillment alternatives. Some of them are going to be healthy, and some of them can be quite destructive. So just a little note on that. The last thing that I'll say about this fulfillment model, again, our goal is to help a couple stay out of extinction and really to stay out of drought. The ideal is that a couple recognizes when they're dipping into complacency and knows how to recover themselves out of complacency. There's no such thing as a relationship that never dips into complacency, that's always in active and passive phase fulfillment. That doesn't exist. So if you're looking for or imagining that possibility, it doesn't exist. That's too perfectionistic of a view. But if we can get good at identifying complacency, then in those imperfect moments and when we're having to adjust to different things in our lives that are very taxing on the relationship, a couple can recognize, oh, I think we're getting a little complacent, and self-recover. So what we're really looking for then is, no matter where we are in this fulfillment model, the answer is active and passive phase fulfillment, right? So for example, if I'm stuck in a drought in my marriage, then a big part of the solution is to start to consider my partner more often and make more active invests more frequently in the relationship, right? Invest more often. And that's going to require me to consider them more often. This is very counterintuitive oftentimes for couples, because when they're experiencing some complacency or a drought, they want their partner to invest in them, to listen to them for understanding, to respond to what their difficulties are, and to show up. And of course, if a couple is going to recover themselves, I need both partners to be willing to do that, right? To consider one another and start to invest in each other more. So the solution is active and passive phase fulfillment, right? Exercising in those places. The more a couple exercises in those places, considering each other and investing in each other, the harder and harder it is to be complacent. It almost becomes impossible to be complacent when you get good at that. But getting a couple to invest in that when they've been in drought or when they're on the verge of extinction, that can be very difficult because it's quite a selfless process. And because they might feel like I've tried to actively invest in my partner and to consider them more often, and they won't reciprocate, which can be a really tough dynamic. So let's move to that topic now, reciprocal fulfillment. Reciprocal fulfillment is when a couple is invested in the needs of the relationship, right? When they kind of come together in a really nice yin-yang type way. The more that I consider you, the more that you consider me, the more often we're investing in us in that relationship. And the relationship is able to receive strength and healing because of this view on one another. And reciprocal fulfillment is kind of nice because it allows selfishness to kind of step out of the relationship. There's not a big need for selfishness when a couple gets good at reciprocal fulfillment. There's kind of this mentality of, you're so good to me, I want to be so good to you. And then, of course, as I'm so good to you, right, it's motivating and enriching for you. It makes you want to be so good to me, which makes me want to be so good to you and you so good to me, right? So a couple can get caught in this. We call them feedback loops and systemic work, which is just a fancy way of talking about relationship counseling and relationship work. We can get caught in this feedback loop of, you're so good to me, I want to be so good to you. And then they experience, you're so good to me, I want to be so good to you. And if we're aware of what's fulfilling to one another, and we're willing to make room for those active investments because we're passively considering each other in the relationship, that can become a really nice reciprocal experience, both wanting to be good to the other because of how good they are to them, which is very different mentality than that drought mentality, that complacency and drought mentality, that's kind of that fend for yourself mentality, right? It's more focused on what I need, not what I can give. And so reciprocal fulfillment is a tremendous goal to have for your marriage, right? Like to try to get to this place again, not with perfection, because that doesn't exist, but to get to a place with each other that we're invested in understanding and fulfilling each other's desires and preferences in the relationship. So that's what that term means. So let me recap a little bit then. The goal is to maintain active and passive fulfillment. Reciprocal fulfillment becomes a kind of target for what we're working toward. And another thing that can help us achieve that is this concept of a relational bank account. So I'll jump through this really quick, and I want to make sure we leave some room at the end here for some Q&A. But a relational bank account is not this. So it's not that, you know, he got a new truck this year and it's football season, so he's spending about, you know, 6 hours a week watching football. And so he's indebted to her because of those privileges, right? So because of his debt, he's going to owe her interest in the relationship, like, you know, 5-foot rubs, the dishes done 10 times, taking the kids to the park, taking them out on dates or flowers twice. We're not talking about keeping score. We're not talking about, you know, who's getting, who's receiving and who's giving. That's not the concept. The concept is a little bit more this idea of deposits and withdrawals. So if you think about an actual checking account or savings account, the goal in a financial account is that we're depositing more than we're withdrawing from a relationship. But of course, in order to be able to do that, we have to know what's fulfilling for our partner. If we're going to make those active deposits, if we're going to actively deposit in the relationship, we have to know what we're depositing. And most of the time, couples pick the thing that they enjoy the most to receive, the way they like to receive love. They typically pick that one by default to give love in their relationship. And sometimes that works out really nicely. For example, if I like to receive love through physical touch, and my tendency is to give love then by default through physical touch, if my partner is a physical touch type lover, that's going to go pretty well. But if they're not, if they're much more acts of service type lover, right? They receive love, they experience love most through somebody going out of their way to offer service and support, or through quality time, let's say, or gifts or words of affirmation. If they're in one of those other categories, and I'm always trying to deposit fulfillment through physical touch, they're probably going to experience a drought, even though I'm trying to make active investments, just because the way that I'm investing isn't necessarily highly fulfilling for them. So knowing what your partner's love language is can be really helpful. If you're curious about that, you can do an online assessment tool. If you go to Gary Chapman's website, The 5 Love Languages, you can take a little quiz online and learn a little bit more about your language of love. But I wanted to give you, I apologize. I wanted to give you a real quick example of what this deposits and withdrawals can look like. So let's say we're going to use a couple as an example. We'll call it Jim and Jane. So let's say in the morning, Jim woke up and he cleaned the sink out after he shaved. And that's a big deposit for Jane because she hates it when he leaves the stubble in the sink. So that was a deposit for her. He cleaned the sink out. She didn't have to come criticize him about it. Let's say after he cleaned the sink out, he gets ready for work and he gives her a kiss, good morning. And that's a nice deposit for her, right? So he then forgot to take the trash out to the curb. That's one of the things that they agreed that would be his responsibility. So that's a withdrawal. But he sends her a love text. He says, hey, babe, I totally forgot to take out the trash. Could you grab that for me? I'm so sorry. Love you, care about you. And that text was a deposit. That was a nice, considerate thing for him to do. He then remembered to grab the milk on the way home. She asked him, you know, on your way home, will you please bring home the milk? He remembered that. That's a nice deposit for her. But he was late getting home from work, and that's frustrating for her because she never quite knows when to plan on him, right? So that was a withdrawal. But when he got home, he gave her a hug and he checked in when getting home. That felt like a deposit to her. He sat with the family and had dinner. She enjoys that when they all eat dinner together. So that was a deposit. He did that honeydew item by fixing the sink down the hall. It's been clogged for a couple of days, and he jumped right on that after dinner, and that felt like a deposit to her. He played with the kids, helped with bedtime. He didn't just leave her to take care of all that. That was a deposit. He listened to her entire story that she shared after that with interest. So not just kind of tolerated the story, but listened with interest. And then he gave her a kiss goodnight. So you'd look at this, right, like over time, and depending on the couple, depending on the responsibilities that they have shared in the relationship, this could be an example of a really positive day for her. It's not that he was perfect. We see that there's two things over there in the withdraw category, but the ratio is about 5-to-1. So there's 2 on the negative side, and there's about 10 on the positive side. It's about a 5-to-1 ratio. And that's what the Gottmans talk about in their research for deposits to withdrawals. If you want to keep a relationship in a really fulfilling place, we need about a 5-to-1 ratio of positive investments per the withdrawals, right? And this is a gentleman that knows his wife well and is looking for opportunities to deposit in pleasing ways. He can't be perfect, but this is a really good day. This day repeated over time is going to help this couple, help her stay in a really fulfilling place in the relationship. It would be different than, let's say, for example, the same morning happened. He woke up and shaved and then cleaned the sink out. He gave her a kiss good morning in the morning. He forgot to take out the trash, so he sent her the text, but he did remember to bring home the milk, but he was late getting home. So let's say all the way up to that point is the same. But instead, when he got home with the milk, instead of hugging her and checking in when he got home, he had a sharp tone with the kids. He walked in and started kind of barking at the kids, and he was distant with his spouse. And about the time that they sat down for family dinner, he just matter-of-factly told her, hey, by the way, I got those new golf clubs that I've been wanting, which were a pretty expensive purchase without consulting with her about it. He still did family dinner, but after dinner, he didn't clear the table, and he didn't do the honey-do items. So the sink down the hall is still clogged, even though she's brought it up several times in the last week. That sink is not draining, we put on there. He played with the kids and helped with bedtime, but instead of listening to her entire story with interest and giving her a kiss goodnight, he told her, I'm sorry, babe, it's been a really long day. I have a headache. I'm just super tired. I don't really have time to listen to the story. But do you want to make love? Right? So we start to look at this ratio, right? This is far from our 5-to-1 ratio. And it would be easy for her, especially if this day were repeated over and over, to start to feel some bankruptcy in the relationship. And it's just not, the deposits versus withdrawals just aren't keeping up in the relationship. So that's kind of an example of how this works. To conclude, I'm going to skip forward this material just for the sake of time. To conclude, I want you to pause for a minute with all this information and ask yourself, audit yourself, how am I doing? Am I aware of my partner's language of love? Do I know the things that are fulfilling to them? That if I were going to make deposits, do I know what those things are to deposit? And am I in complacency? Am I in drought, right? Based on criticism and defensiveness and contempt and some of those other signs we talked about, where are you in the phases of fulfillment, right? So to take a pause just for a minute and reflect on that, to do a deposit, to do an audit. My hope for you is that, and a challenge for today, is that you'll make a deposit. Right now, if your partner's with you, and if not right now because you're on here, maybe just right after we're done having this conversation, that one of those things that you know go a long way for them, that you'll make that deposit, that you'll make another deposit later this evening before you go to bed, and that you'll keep making deposits this week on a 5-to-1 ratio. And if you really want to go above and beyond and get extra credit, that you'll repeat that every week thereafter indefinitely. There's no way you can do that with perfection, but my invitation to you is to look for active ways that you can invest in love with your partner, to be mindful and considerate of that, and make those deposits as often as possible. I wanted to, last piece, and then we'll open up to a Q&A here. I wanted to share with you about some of the materials that we offer. The reason why is I talked with the Marriage Commission and said, as a thank you for joining us, I wanted to give a 50% discount on some of our materials. And one of those materials is we've put together a whole course for couples called the Renew System for Couples. It's about 18 hours worth of video training and downloadable activities and worksheets that can be found on one of our websites called the Renew School. And so that's what this is showing, is some of those video modules off of our website. We also have on that same website continuing education trainings, where I teach principles for mental health professionals, and professionals can receive continuing education credits for doing those online trainings. And I wanted to share those with you as just as a gift, to let you know that we wanted to offer those at 50% off for everybody who's been involved today. So all of our couples courses are 50% off with a coupon code to you for participating. And all of our CE trainings for professionals are 50% off to you for participating. And the way that you can engage, find those and engage them is go to this renewlove.teachable.com. That's what this QR code is. So you can click through to this Renew Love page and use coupon code SAVE50%. So if you put that in at checkout, it'll take 50% off the prices of our couples courses as well as our continuing education. You can also click over to that website through our main website, renewrelationshipcounseling.com. On that website, you'll see a tab that talks about our video courses and our continuing education for professionals. And you can click over to that Renew Love Teachable website. So thank you so much for having me today. And I guess we'll probably open it up for a Q&A now. I think we're at that time. So.
Yes, thank you so much again, Nevin, for your presentation. We'll be starting our live Q&A now. So just a reminder that the Q&A function is found at the bottom of the screen, and you can submit any questions that you have. We'll just start with some that we already have right now. The first one is it sounding like the couple as a whole is categorized by a fulfillment stage? But it seems like it might be unequal in some cases. Could one person be at a higher level of fulfillment than their partner?
Yeah, love that question. And yes, for sure. Sometimes when we assess a couple as they come in and we're working with them, sometimes they're on the same page. We share with them a little bit about the phases of fulfillment, and they're like, yep, we are squarely in drought. And drought is actually the most common place that a relationship is in when they seek out marriage counseling. I wish they would come when they realized they were struggling with complacency, because it's a little bit quicker healing process. But drought is the most common phase in which a couple pursues couples counseling. So sometimes they're on the same page that way. There is cases, though, where they're not. I had a couple come in just a couple of weeks ago, and he said, I'm great. I don't even know why she's dragging me here, right? He's like, I feel like we're in that top area on your fulfillment model. He was like, I'm happy, I'm fulfilled. We're doing great. And she's sitting next to him with her arms folded, like, right? Where she's down in a little bit more of that drought, maybe verging on extinction place. And that can happen sometimes because she might be really great at considering him and actively investing, knowing him well enough to actively invest often, and he might be neglectful, right? So that can happen sometimes where his experience is quite positive, but he's not doing the reciprocal fulfillment thing where he realizes the neglect he might be having, the drought he might be creating in her fulfillment experience in the relationship. So yes, for sure, two individuals can be in different places sometimes on that model. Yeah, great question.
Great. The next one we have says, I imagine attachment style has a significant impact on how partners experience different levels of the fulfillment model. Can you comment on how you might address that with an anxious avoidant pair?
Okay, tell me one more time. Let me digest that question.
Okay. I imagine attachment style has a significant impact on how partners experience different levels of the fulfillment model.
Yeah.
Can you comment how you might address that with an anxious avoidant?
Yeah, great. Yeah, anxious avoidant. One of the difficult things about anxious avoidant is that desire to be vulnerable is really small, right? So there's this hesitancy to open myself up and be vulnerable in a relationship. And certainly in order for attachment to occur or for deposits that my partner might be making to land with me, I've got to have a certain level of openness for it to land on, right? So if my heart is completely closed up, if I'm anxious about being vulnerable and anxious about attaching, it means that my heart's going to be kind of barricaded a little bit. behind anxiety for safety reasons, perceived safety reasons. And so they might make deposits all day long, right? And they still can be barricaded in a way that they don't land on my heart. That can be a really common struggle for sure. And one of the places that we'll oftentimes start is we'll kind of diagnose that, assess and diagnose that as a couple, and understand it better with both partners, and then might recommend some individual work for the person who's having the attachment struggle, a little bit of individual work to kind of dig into what's created that struggle and what are some traumas maybe or some relationships that have contributed to that. That if they do a little bit of healing work, they might also be able to feel a little bit more safety to be vulnerable in a relationship and receive in the relationship. And about the time that they're able to create a little bit more safety and find a little bit more vulnerability, the couple's work can really take off in creating that fulfillment. So yeah, there are situations like that where sometimes there needs to be a little bit of individual nurture and support and work in order to get to a place where deposits can land. The anxious attachment oftentimes can be pretty good at giving in the relationship. It's usually the receiving that starts to become harder.
Great, thank you so much. The next question is, do husbands and wives typically have the same deposits and withdrawals, or are their deposits and withdrawals different typically?
Yeah, so great question. Sometimes they're fairly similar. Oftentimes they're not, though, and that's a mistake that couples can make. That like the example I used earlier, if I'm a physical touch lover, if that's how I like to receive love, it typically is going to become my default in giving love in that way. And my wife might not mind physical touch. She likes the physical touch, but the acts of service just go much deeper into her heart, right? So if I neglect looking for opportunities to serve and support her, and instead, I'm just handsy with her all the time, she might feel neglected and in a drought, even though I'm giving a lot of love, what I think is love. So really learning each other and understanding each other is so critical to being able to be successful in the giving and receiving of love in the relationship. And that starts with knowing myself well enough that I can teach my partner a little bit about how to love me, and then coach them and give them feedback as we go through the relationship on how they're doing in that loving me process. Sometimes I feel like they ought to know how to love me, and then I'll feel quietly hurt and offended when they're not doing a good job. And I'm a big fan of let's educate each other, and then educate each other some more, and practice those new habits that may not come naturally to each other. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. And then this kind of goes back to a previous question, but it's if one partner keeps making the deposits, but there isn't that reciprocal fulfillment cycle, can the drought partner make any kind of difference?
Yeah, so it becomes really hard when the reciprocal fulfillment isn't happening, because obviously if I'm working hard to try to be pleasing to my partner, that's an expenditure for me. It takes energy, it takes focus, it takes investment and commitment, right? So there's going to be an expenditure there, which is usually just fine because that expenditure is taken care of by their reciprocation of my investment. Right? So if I'm focused on them and giving in the relationship, ideally, they're doing the same, focused on me and giving. And their offering is what fills my cup to help me continue to give. It's part of what fills my cup. We don't want to be enmeshed and dependent where it's the only thing that fills my cup, but it becomes part of it. So it can become a very frustrating and taxing process if I feel like I'm constantly working to try to give and there isn't a receive opportunity in the relationship. It can be really hard to maintain active and passive phase fulfillment on my part. That can lead very quickly to me experiencing a drought because there isn't reciprocation coming. And then as I start to experience more and more of that complacency and drought, my ability to offer in the relationship goes down, which means the likelihood they experience complacency in a drought goes up, right? So that can be a really tough dynamic. And sometimes that's the dynamic that a couple is in. I found in most cases, the couples aren't malicious. So in most cases, they're not intentionally neglecting each other on purpose. Sometimes that's the case in some severe personality disorders, that can be the case, but usually that's not the case. Usually it's either a lack of knowledge for what is fulfilling and not fulfilling. Sometimes it's a lack of practice, so they're just not good at the skills. Sometimes the communication hasn't happened for them to even be aware of how well they're performing. And then oftentimes life happens. So they have lots of demands and they haven't figured out how to juggle all those in a productive way. So all those, there's some great solutions to all those. The personality one's tougher, right? If somebody's just malicious, the solution there might be the relationship might need to end. So.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. The next question is it possible for both partners to be in different phases of fulfillment?
Yes. Yeah, I think we kind of spoke to that one just a minute ago. Yes, they definitely can. One person can be experiencing more joy and happiness than another. And sometimes too, there's a partner that's a little bit more self-reliant, independent, and one that's a little bit more needy or codependent, based on the way they grew up or personalities or whatever else it is. So sometimes they can be in different places for that reason too, that I might be kind of very independent and I don't need as much from my partner. So it's harder for me to feel a drought in the relationship. Whereas if my partner kind of leans on the relationship more, maybe even sometimes more than they should, they might feel a drought even when when a marriage counselor, when a professional might say a drought doesn't exist here. They might experience it because they're too reliant on the relationship for fulfillment. So that's another reason that they can end up in two different places. But yes, absolutely they can.
Okay, awesome. And then let's see. Okay. Can you share an example of how you may have dealt with one of the four horsemen in your own relationship and how you combated that? And if you don't have a story of yourself, maybe someone you know?
Yeah, no, I'll get a little vulnerable with you. So early on in my relationship, one of the four horsemen that I started to notice in me, I didn't know the term back then. That was as I was still going to graduate school and learning. But looking back, I definitely started to feel some defensiveness and some contempt in the relationship. And the reason why is when we first got married, I worked a swing shift, which got over about 11:30 at night. And my wife worked a morning shift at her work, a different place. And so it meant that she had to get up around 6 a.m. every morning. So this created kind of a pattern where I would get off very late and get home, and I'm kind of wired. I want to eat something. I want to tell her a little bit about my day. And certainly I'd love to connect with her in those ways. And she'd be exhausted, right? And so she would do her best to try to stay alert and engaged. And she would fall asleep often while we would talk or while we were cuddling or if I were hoping to make love or something, right? She would fall asleep easily. And that used to hurt me. I used to feel like, man, if I meant more to you, you would be excited to talk with me like I'm excited to talk with you, right? And so definitely started to experience some of that contempt in the relationship, mainly from a pain place, right? Like hurting. And then of course, as we communicated more and I got to know her better, I realized, no, that's just her. At a certain time at night, it's tough for her to stay alert and awake with anybody. It wasn't personal about me, it's about her. And it was about our schedule being so opposite. She was losing sleep the longer that she would stay up to talk with me, and I could sleep in the morning, right? And so I started to realize, okay, this isn't as personal as it feels. This is just a dynamic in our connection we need to figure out how to adjust with. And we made some of those adjustments, and it's been lots better since then, adjusting those expectations and how we connect with each other. But certainly, yes, I started to feel that kind of defensiveness and contempt building in me because I felt like she didn't care enough about me to want to connect with me. And that was a bummer. So, yeah.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. And just kind of to end here, what would you say is the best way to stay connected with you and your business moving forward? Would that be your website, or is there an email where someone could reach you moving forward?
Yeah, so certainly our website, if you jump on our website, my email address is on there. If you click on my photo, you'll be able to read a little bio about me and my email address is on there. You can reach out to our business directly too, text or email. We're also on social media. We have a YouTube channel, Renew Relationship Counseling on YouTube. And then we're on Instagram and Facebook as well. Renew Love on Instagram, and on Facebook, Renew Relationship Counseling. We're on LinkedIn. We're on a lot of the places. So love to have any outreach that way, questions, consultations, and work that way. So yeah, those are all great ways to find me, get a hold of me. So
awesome. Thank you so much, Nevin. Again, we're so glad that you're able to join us, and thank you to everyone that joined on this webinar. We're grateful for your questions and your participation. And once again, if you attended this webinar for a CEU credit, once the webinar ends, your survey and certificate will be sent to your email from the UMC email. And then once you complete that survey, you will get a certification email back from us, if that makes sense. Yeah. And thank you so much again, everyone, for joining. We hope you all have a great night.
Thank you, everyone. It's good being with you.